Chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, the Yoga of Meditation. In this chapter, Krishna turns Arjuna's attention inward. Until now, we have learned of action, duty, and knowledge. But here, the journey enters the silent battlefield of the mind. Meditation is not escape, nor is it mere silence. It is the art of mastering attention, of balancing life's extremes, and of discovering the self beyond noise and desire. Modern psychology calls it mindfulness. Neuroscience shows it reshapes the very wiring of the brain, and logic confirms. Only a still lake can reflect the moon clearly. This is the path of Dhyana Yoga, where discipline, detachment, and devotion come together to reveal inner freedom. Arjuna, still carrying doubts in his heart, asks Krishna what it truly means to live as a yogi. Is it better to renounce all action, or to remain in the world but detached? Krishna answers with a powerful revelation. In verse 1 of chapter 6, he declares, "He who performs his duty without dependence on its fruits, and who neither clings to action nor to renunciation, that one is a true yogi." Here, Krishna begins to redefine yoga itself. It is not escapism, nor blind indulgence. The yogi is one who works, but without chains. Psychology reflects this as intrinsic motivation, doing something because it is meaningful, not because of reward or fear. Neuroscience supports it. When the brain is engaged in purposeful action without obsessing over results, stress hormones drop and clarity rises. Logic too explains. The tree gives fruit without attachment, yet remains firmly rooted. In verse 2, Krishna continues, "Know that person to be a true renunciate, who neither hates nor desires. For without freedom from duality, one can never become a yogi." This verse shows us that yoga is balance. To renounce is not to abandon, but to stand steady beyond love and hate, success and failure. Psychology calls this emotional regulation, the ability to stay grounded even when storms rage outside. Neuroscience shows that mindfulness strengthens the prefrontal cortex, allowing calm choice instead of reactive extremes. Logic makes it simple. The scale that tips neither way always shows true measure. Then, Krishna sets the bar higher. In verse 3, he reveals, "For the sage who is new to yoga, action is the means. For the sage who is perfected in yoga, stillness is the means." At first, discipline begins with action, training the body, the senses, and the mind. But as mastery grows, one moves naturally toward inner stillness. Psychology echoes this. Habits must be built before they can dissolve into effortless flow. Neuroscience confirms. Repetition forms neural pathways, and when mastery comes, the brain needs less effort to act with grace. Logic clarifies. The student first practices every note, but the master plays music without thought. This is the opening of Dhyana Yoga, the path where discipline ripens into meditation, and meditation into freedom. Krishna now deepens the teaching, showing how a yogi must live. In verse 4, he says, "Only he who has renounced all selfish desires and attachments, who neither clings to possessions nor to action itself, is truly called a yogi." This verse shifts the focus from outer renunciation to inner freedom. Psychology calls this detachment, the ability to own things without being owned by them. Neuroscience observes that when we reduce compulsive attachment, our brain's stress circuits quiet down, creating lasting peace. Logic too reminds us, the traveler carries his belongings lightly, but if he clings to the load, it crushes him. In verse 5, Krishna gives a profound instruction. "Let a man lift himself by his own self. Let him not degrade himself, for the self alone is his friend, and the self alone is his enemy." Here lies the heart of yoga. Self-mastery psychology describes this as self-leadership, where our higher awareness guides our impulses. Neuroscience explains that the prefrontal cortex can regulate the emotional brain, turning chaos into clarity. Logic illustrates. The rider who controls his horse reaches the destination, but if he loses control, the horse drags him astray. In verse 6, Krishna continues this truth. "For him who has conquered the mind is the best friend. But for him who has failed to do so, the mind remains the greatest enemy." This is a timeless reminder. Psychology shows us how unchecked thoughts lead to anxiety and addiction, while trained awareness becomes a source of resilience. Neuroscience proves the same. Meditation strengthens pathways of calm focus, while a restless mind feeds endless stress. Logic states it simply. Fire can cook the meal or burn the house, depending on how it is controlled. This is the beginning of Krishna's vision of the yogi, one who governs himself, who walks steady, who finds strength not in outer power but in inner mastery. Krishna now describes the state of a true yogi. In verse 7, he says, "The yogi who has mastered himself, who is tranquil and free from attachment, remains steady in heat and cold, in pleasure and pain, in honor and dishonor." Here, the yogi rises above opposites. Psychology calls this resilience, the ability to stay balanced no matter the external condition. Neuroscience shows that meditation reduces reactivity in the amygdala, so the mind is not constantly hijacked by extremes. Logic too confirms. The mountain peak does not bow to the wind, whether it blows warm or cold. In verse 8, Krishna explains further. the yogi who is satisfied with knowledge and wisdom, steady like a rock, who has conquered the senses, and who regards a lump of clay, a stone, and gold as the same. Such a yogi is called steadfast. This verse reveals the vision of equality. Psychology describes this as non-attachment to material symbols of wealth and value. Neuroscience observes that reduced craving stabilizes dopamine pathways, preventing the restless chase for more. Logic adds, the scale that weighs gold and dust equally shows true balance. In verse 9, Krishna expands the circle of equality. The yogi is equal toward friends and enemies, toward the neutral, the mediator, the hateful, the relative, the righteous, and even the sinful. This is universal vision, to see beyond labels. Psychology calls it unconditional regard, where all beings are treated with dignity. Neuroscience shows that compassion practices increase activity in brain networks linked to empathy, reducing bias and judgment. Logic explains, the sun shines on all, the saint, the sinner, the river, and the rock, without discrimination. Through these verses, Krishna shows that yoga is not just sitting in meditation, it is living with equanimity, seeing all with the same clear eye, and standing steady in the ever-changing play of the world. Krishna now turns from describing the yogi's qualities to instructing how a yogi should actually live. In verse 10 he says, the yogi should constantly engage in meditation, remaining in seclusion, alone, with mind and body controlled, free from desires and possessions. Here solitude is not escape, but inner alignment. Psychology notes that silence and solitude restore mental clarity. Neuroscience reveals that in quiet states, the brain's default mode network settles, reducing mental chatter. Logic explains, the flame burns steady in a place without wind. In verse 11, Krishna gives practical instruction. Let the yogi prepare a firm seat in a clean place, neither too high nor too low, covered with grass, cloth, and a deerskin. This symbolizes balance and purity in practice. Psychology interprets it as creating a sacred space, an environment that conditions the mind for focus. Neuroscience confirms that consistent surroundings strengthen habit loops. Logic shows, the archer hits the target best when standing on stable ground. In verse 12, Krishna continues, there, seated firmly, with mind concentrated, controlling thoughts and senses, the yogi should practice meditation for self-purification. Meditation is not escape but discipline. Psychology calls this mindfulness, training awareness to return again and again to stillness. Neuroscience explains that meditation reshapes the prefrontal cortex, enhancing focus and reducing stress. Logic says, the river clears itself when its flow is undisturbed. In verse 13 to 14, Krishna refines the posture, keeping the body, head and neck upright, steady and still, focusing the gaze at the tip of the nose, without letting the eyes wander, serene, fearless, with a mind disciplined in celibacy. The yogi sits, absorbed in meditation, with the mind fixed on me. This is the heart of Dhyana, yoga, posture, discipline, focus, and surrender. Psychology confirms posture influences mental states, as the body anchors awareness. Neuroscience observes that steady gaze and breath calm the nervous system. Logic concludes, the bow must be drawn straight if the arrow is to fly true. Krishna now describes the fruits of meditation. In verse 15 he says, thus, the yogi who constantly disciplines himself with mind absorbed in meditation on me attains supreme peace, nirvana, and union with me. Meditation then is not merely relaxation but union with the divine. Psychology calls this transcendence, the state where the self feels connected to something larger. Neuroscience shows that deep meditation reduces ego-centered brain activity, creating feelings of oneness. Logic reveals, when the drop merges into the ocean, it no longer fears drying up. In verse 16, Krishna warns, yoga is not for one who eats too much, nor for one who eats too little. It is not for one who sleeps excessively, nor for one who sleeps too little. Balance is the foundation. Psychology teaches that extremes break stability, moderation sustains growth. Neuroscience confirms that both deprivation and excess harm brain and body regulation. Logic explains, the lute string too tight will snap, too loose will not play. In verse 17, Krishna affirms, but for one who is balanced in eating and recreation, balanced in work and rest, balanced in sleep and wakefulness, yoga destroys all sorrow. Here, discipline becomes harmony. Psychology calls this homeostasis. The mind thrives in balance. Neuroscience shows that circadian rhythm, nutrition, and rest regulate the nervous system for clarity. Logic says, the wheel turns smoothly when all spokes are even. In verse 18, he deepens the teaching. When the mind, restrained from desires, rests in the self alone, free from craving, then he is truly established in yoga. This is inner mastery. When meditation silences longing, psychology recognizes this as flow, full presence without distraction. Neuroscience sees it as decreased activity in craving circuits of the brain. Logic shows, The lamp burns steadily when shielded from the wind. In verse 19, Krishna gives a timeless image. As a lamp in a windless place does not flicker, so the yogi's controlled mind remains steady in meditation on the self. This is the perfect symbol of Dhyana yoga, unwavering awareness. Psychology calls this mental stability. Neuroscience records it as coherence in brainwaves during deep meditation. Logic concludes, where there is no disturbance, clarity shines on its own. Krishna now describes what lies beyond meditation, the state of union with the self. In verse 20, he declares, when the disciplined mind becomes still, free from desire, absorbed only in the self, then one is said to be established in yoga. This is the turning point where meditation ripens into realization. Psychology calls it self-actualization, reaching the highest potential of inner awareness. Neuroscience shows that in such states, brain activity shifts toward deep harmony, reducing restlessness. Logic clarifies, when the river finds the ocean, its journey ends in peace. In verse 21, Krishna reveals the fruit of this union. In that state, he experiences endless joy, perceived not by the senses, but grasped by purified intellect, beyond all doubt. This joy is not worldly pleasure, but bliss untouched by loss or change. Psychology recognizes it as transcendent well-being. Neuroscience records that meditation activates brain regions linked to inner satisfaction, independent of external reward. Logic explains, the sun shines by itself. It does not borrow light from elsewhere. In verse 22, he continues, having attained this, one does not think there is any higher gain. Established in this, one is never shaken, even by the greatest sorrow. This is freedom from suffering, unshakable stability. Psychology affirms that resilience comes from inner anchoring, not external circumstance. Neuroscience shows that meditation rewires stress responses, allowing calm even in adversity. Logic states, the mountain stands firm whether storms rage or skies clear. Finally, in verse 23, Krishna concludes this section. That state of severance from union with sorrow is known as yoga. This yoga must be practiced with determination and a steady heart. Thus, yoga is not escape, but the science of freedom. Psychology calls this disciplined practice the path to lasting peace. Neuroscience supports it. Consistency in meditation reshapes the brain toward balance. Logic teaches, the seed becomes a tree only through steady nurturing, not through neglect. Krishna now gives practical instructions on how meditation must be practiced. In verse 24, he advises, abandoning all desires born of worldly intent, restraining the senses from all sides, one should fix the mind upon the self. This is the first step, letting go. Psychology shows that detachment reduces inner conflict and clears space for focus. Neuroscience explains that reducing distractions lowers cognitive load, allowing deeper attention. Logic says, the lamp burns brightest when sheltered from the wind. In verse 25, he continues, little by little, let one attain tranquility with a steady intellect, keeping the mind fixed on the self and thinking of nothing else. Meditation is not force, but gentle discipline. Psychology calls this incremental training, progress through small, consistent effort. Neuroscience confirms that repeated focus strengthens neural pathways for calm awareness. Logic proves, the ocean becomes calm not at once, but as each wave subsides. In verse 26, Krishna acknowledges the restless mind. Whenever the mind wanders, due to its unsteady nature, bring it back under control and place it upon the self. Here is the heart of meditation, returning again and again. Psychology calls it mindfulness, awareness that notices distraction and returns to the present. Neuroscience shows that this act of returning strengthens attention control. Logic illustrates, the child who strays must be gently brought home, not abandoned. In verse 27, Krishna describes the result. The yogi, whose mind is disciplined, attains supreme peace. He abides in Brahman, free from sin, and experiences eternal happiness. This is the fruit of true meditation, inner peace that no circumstance can disturb. Psychology confirms that regular practice transforms anxiety into equanimity. Neuroscience demonstrates that meditation fosters long-lasting happiness pathways in the brain. Logic reveals, the flame in a windless place does not flicker. Krishna now explains the higher fruits of meditation. In verse 28, he says, the yogi, absorbed in meditation, freed from impurities, easily attains the infinite bliss of union with Brahman. Meditation cleanses the mind like a river washing away dirt. Psychology agrees that deep focus dissolves toxic thoughts and builds emotional resilience. Neuroscience shows that meditation rewires brain regions, leading to calm and joy. Logic reminds us, when the mirror is polished, it reflects the sun perfectly. In verse 29, Krishna reveals a yogi's vision. The yogi sees all beings equally in himself, and himself in all beings. This is the essence of unity. Psychology calls it empathy, dissolving the walls of ego. Neuroscience shows that compassion lights up the same brain circuits as self-care. Logic affirms, one who sees the thread sees all pearls as one necklace. In verse 30, he declares, he who sees me everywhere, and sees all beings in me, never loses me, and I never lose him. This is divine intimacy, union beyond separation. Psychology describes this as the highest state of connectedness, dissolving loneliness. Neuroscience shows that meditation creates a sense of oneness that transcends self-centered thinking. Logic proves, the wave that remembers it is ocean never fears breaking. In verse 31, Krishna deepens it. The yogi who is steadfast, who worships me dwelling in all beings, remains in me at all times. Meditation is not escape. It is sacred presence in every act, every moment. Psychology calls this flow, living fully absorbed in the now. Neuroscience links it to peak states of awareness, where the sense of time fades. Logic explains, the gold is in every ornament, yet the ornaments remain gold. Finally, in verse 32, Krishna sums up the yogi's vision. One who regards all beings alike, whether in pleasure or pain, is considered the highest yogi. This is a quality in its purest form. Psychology describes it as emotional balance and compassion. Neuroscience shows that meditation reduces bias and fosters universal care. Logic makes it clear. The sun shines equally on lotus and mud alike. Hearing Krishna's words about the lofty yogi, Arjuna feels the weight of human weakness. With humility, he asks a heartfelt question. In verse 33, Arjuna says, "O Krishna, the discipline of yoga you describe seems too difficult, for the mind is restless and unsteady." This is the voice of every seeker who has struggled to sit still. Psychology calls this the wandering mind, full of distraction and craving. Neuroscience confirms, the brain's default mode is restless, jumping from thought to thought. Logic shows, the wind cannot be caught in the fist, nor the mind easily bound. In verse 34, Arjuna adds, the mind is turbulent, powerful, and obstinate. To control it seems harder than to control the wind. This is honesty, not weakness. Psychology says the mind's patterns are deeply conditioned by habit. Neuroscience shows that constant stimulation strengthens restlessness, making silence difficult. Logic affirms, the wild horse resists the reins until patient training tames it. Krishna answers with reassurance. In verse 35 he declares, O mighty Arjuna, the restless mind can be controlled through practice and detachment. This is the secret key. Abhygsa, steady practice, and Vairagya, letting go. Psychology teaches that consistency rewires habit. Neuroscience shows that repeated meditation literally reshapes neural circuits. Logic explains, the river carves stone not by force, but by steady flow. In verse 36, Krishna concludes, without self-discipline, yoga is hard to attain. But for one who strives with discipline, yoga is within reach. The path is not impossible. It is simply gradual. Psychology calls this self-regulation, building inner strength step by step. Neuroscience confirms that even a few minutes of meditation daily builds resilience. Logic proves, no mountain is climbed in one leap, but step by steady step. Still, Arjuna's heart is restless. He worries not for the strong, but for the weak. For the seeker who begins the path of yoga but fails to complete it. With compassion, he asks Krishna. In verse 37, Arjuna says, O Krishna, what becomes of the man who begins yoga with faith, but falls away, unable to control himself? Does he not perish like a broken cloud, lost and without support? This is a profound human fear, the fear of failure. Psychology calls it performance anxiety, the dread that if one does not succeed, all effort is wasted. Neuroscience shows the brain is wired to avoid loss more than it seeks gain, which is why people often hesitate to begin. Logic frames it clearly. What use is sowing seed if the crop never ripens? In verse 38, Arjuna continues, fallen from both worlds, deluded, is he not destroyed, with no place in either the spiritual or material life? This is the cry of the human heart, afraid that incomplete effort leads to emptiness. Psychology calls this the all-or-nothing mindset. Neuroscience shows that uncertainty activates the brain's fear circuits more than pain itself. Logic too asks, if the bridge is left half-built, can one cross the river? Krishna smiles, dispelling Arjuna's doubt. In verse 39, he assures, O Arjuna, neither in this world nor in the next does one who strives for yoga ever perish, for no sincere effort is ever lost. This is the eternal promise. Every step on the path is preserved. Psychology supports this. Every attempt at change strengthens mental pathways, even if results are unseen. Neuroscience confirms that even failed practice reshapes the brain for future growth. Logic explains, the water that seeps into the earth is not wasted. It nourishes roots unseen, until the tree one day blossoms. Krishna now reveals a great secret, that no effort in yoga is ever wasted across lifetimes. In verse 40, he says, the yogi who falls away is not destroyed. He is reborn into a pure and prosperous family, where the path of yoga is easier to follow. This means that spiritual effort carries forward. Psychology supports this. Habits and impressions, once formed, shape character beyond a single moment. Neuroscience suggests that learning leaves deep traces in memory networks, which persist even when dormant. Logic shows, The seed buried in winter does not die. It waits for spring to sprout again. In verse 41, Krishna describes another destiny, or such a yogi may be born into a family of wise sages, a birth that is very rare and most blessed. Here lies the idea of continuity of growth. Psychology reflects this as inherited environment. A supportive family can nurture potential where it left off. Neuroscience affirms. A rich environment activates dormant abilities. Logic explains. The flame that dims in one lamp may be reignited when placed in another. In verse 42, Krishna adds, there he regains the knowledge from his past birth, and strives again toward perfection. Thus, nothing is wasted. Psychology observes that people often show unexplained talents or tendencies early in life. Echoes of past learning. Neuroscience speaks of latent memory, circuits reawakened when the right conditions arise. Logic states, the traveler who pauses on the road still remembers the direction when he resumes. In verse 43, Krishna continues, even without seeking, he is carried forward by the impressions of previous practice. The yogi is irresistibly drawn toward liberation. This is the momentum of the soul. Psychology calls it unconscious drive. Neuroscience confirms that once pathways are carved, the brain naturally follows them. Logic clarifies, the river, once set in motion, cannot easily turn back. Finally, in verse 44 to 45, Krishna concludes this teaching. The yogi who strives with effort, purified of faults, gradually attains perfection through many births, and at last reaches the supreme goal. This is hope eternal. Psychology assures us, growth is cumulative, not erased by setbacks. Neuroscience agrees. Every repetition strengthens the pattern. Logic proclaims, the sun may set, but it always rises again. Krishna now lifts the curtain on the highest truth, the greatness of the yogi. In verse 46, he declares, the yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the learned scholar, greater than the richest. Therefore, O Arjuna, become a yogi. This is a bold statement. The yogi surpasses the ascetic who only renounces, the scholar who only knows, and the ritualist who only performs. Psychology explains that integration is higher than specialization. Balance of body, mind, and spirit leads to wholeness. Neuroscience agrees. Meditation activates and harmonizes diverse regions of the brain, creating unity. Logic illustrates. The root nourishes the tree more than any single branch. In verse 47, Krishna reveals the climax of Dhyana yoga. And among all yogis, he who surrenders his mind to me with faith, who abides in me with devotion, he is the highest of all. Here, meditation reaches its peak, not mere discipline but love-filled union with the divine. Psychology calls this transcendence, when devotion gives life meaning beyond self. Neuroscience shows that love and surrender activate pathways of joy and peace. Logic clarifies. The river, no matter how vast, finds fulfillment only when it merges into the ocean. Thus ends chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, the yoga of meditation. Krishna has shown that the yogi is the highest of seekers, and that meditation ripens into devotion. The restless mind can be tamed. Failures are not final, and the soul is carried forward until it finds union with the Supreme.